expression, holding hands. It doesn't matter where you're from, or if you're young or woman or man. We're here for the same reason. We want to take back our land. Oh God, thank you for giving us the strength to hold
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening and welcome back. You are tuned into the special focus on Salam Media. We are together until 8 p.m. Of course, right here on Salam Media via our live stream on salammedia.com/listen-live on our Facebook page and on our YouTube page, as well as on our Twitter page as well. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening. Now, the Democratic Alliance has been in the spotlight very much for the wrong reasons recently. It seems disgruntled members have no worry airing their issues in the public domain, and the result of that is a nasty blow to the official opposition party's reputation. As one commentator duly noted, the DA seems to have begun to uphold an unenviable tradition of having the messiest public facing leadership spats in recent political memory. An apparent domino effect of resignations took place nearly a year ago, including that of Musi Maimane and Herman Mashaba, and now it seems the party's woes are still far from over. Tonight, we try to find out how the once rapidly rising opposition political party found itself on the tracks of a disastrous downward spiral, and how this will play out in the 2021 local government election. Let me introduce you to our guests this evening. Firstly, we have Sanusha Naidu, who is a senior research associate at the Institute for Global Dialogue. Thank you so much for joining us, Sanusha.
Good evening, Zaida. Thank you for the invitation.
It's a pleasure having you on the show this evening. We also have Mr. Nkosikuluden Nyambezi, who is a policy analyst, and he's also the chairperson of the Election Monitoring Network. Thank you so much for joining us as well.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me. Pleasure.
Last but not least, let me welcome Mr. Herman Pretorius, who is a political analyst at the IRR, and he's also the deputy head of policy there at that institution. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Zahid. Thank you very much that I can join you.
Indeed. Thank you to all of you for joining us. It is a pleasure to have you on the show this evening. So let me just remind the listeners and viewers that you can participate in this discussion, whether you'd like to comment on the matter at hand or you'd like to put forward a question to our panelists. Please do feel free to send us a WhatsApp message via the number 061 766 0355. Let me just repeat that number. It's 061 766 0355. You could also tweet and tag at Salam Media. Alternatively, you may leave a comment below on our Facebook and YouTube live videos. So the choice is yours, really. Now, Sirisha, let's start with you. So it seems as though the Democratic Alliance has fallen from being in a situation of making strong progress, steady progress in 2018, to now giving every impression of weakness and increased chaos, as described in an article on the Daily Maverick. Just exactly what is going on in the DA at the moment? Perhaps you could start at what you think was the very beginning of this downward spiral, and then speak a bit more about Mr. John Moody's resignation last week. Seems like internal issues are now boiling over, Sirisha.
Thank you, Zaid. I mean, I think fallen is a bit of a strong word for the DA. I think it's going through an interesting internal transition or metamorphosis or whatever is happening in terms of where it wanted to be with regard to its kind of expansion with in terms of its membership base and how that actually played itself out. I think the challenges internally in the DA is particularly in terms of how it has become it had become a very broad based party. So if you look at the way in which the coalition worked with regard to members of the former and now the defunct New National Party moving into the DA, camping within the DA, the coalition within the Western Cape, and then of course trying to expand the DA from the DP rather at that time into a democratic alliance with the IFP, and then of course trying to bring in and of course with the Freedom Front Plus, you kind of end up with all of these different camps camping in one party, different ideological dispensations, different people with different voters, different electoral bases coming together, feeling a bit disaffected from where they are, coming into the Democratic Alliance, and as a result, once you start seeing this kind of coalescing taking place within the party, the tensions start to emerge. And of course, in terms of where the party is now, is how do you reconcile these different interest-based and constituencies that exist within the party? Can you satisfy all the interests, or can you only try and talk about the broader interests? And so as the party evolves, and in the Western Cape, I think it's quite interesting to note that you had those members that were former national party, particularly from the colored base, who went into the Democratic Party stroke Democratic Alliance. And then eventually what you have is how do they now feel in this party? And so internally, as the party is growing, as new generations are coming into the party, other constituencies are leaving, and these tensions are beginning to spill over, whether it's ideological, whether it's interest-based, whether it's about you find your context within the party. I think that's what's really happening internally. So in terms of where the party is now, I would say that it's going through this kind of genesis, in a sense, where it's trying to find the fit, accommodate everyone, but unfortunately it's difficult to do when you have competing interests. And of course, the challenge with regard to the John Moody affair, I think it's a question of different contexts and people that are in the party and what the expectations are of what a kind of democratic alliance, a broad democratic alliance, will be doing. Do they feel comfortable, etc.? I think there is that sense that black voters or black constituencies in the party feel squeezed. I mean, it doesn't just start off with John Moody. It didn't start off with Musime Amani. It didn't start off with Herman Mashaba. It actually began with Lindiwe Mazibuko as well. And so these, I mean, and the question there for me is it about only race, or is there some kind of personality clash, interests that don't reconcile within the party? And so how is this playing itself out? It's unfortunate at times that it comes across, the optics of what's happening in the party comes across in that way. But I do think that this is a lesson in terms of how parties grow. How do they actually retain their level of consolidation? How do they actually evolve and move forward in a landscape where you want to diversify the party? But unfortunately, the challenge in South Africa is that we can't escape race, and it's a big question for us to think about. As much as we want to transcend and we want to graduate outside of the race census debate in this country, we can't do it. It's everywhere. It's pervasive in everything that's happening in society today. I don't have to tell you about the whole question of the cliques debacle and what's going on there. But I think in that context, we have to ask ourselves, in terms of as not just the DA, but all political parties, as they move forward, how are they taking into account the structural changes and the way in which South African society is evolving? And I can see where some of these tensions spill out in terms of the policy dimension, and whether or not certain of the policy dynamics and arguments and propositions that are put forward, is it really coming out in the way that you are dealing with it? It's a long drawn out issue. If you look at the structural inequalities, if you look at our structural conditions in this country, it's endemic. It's basically quite entrenched, and it's going to take a long while for that trust element to come in. And so I think those are the hard questions that we have to ask ourselves and talk about. And of course, there's also the bigger macro picture, not just in South Africa but globally as well, where the liberal model or the liberal debates are being challenged globally as well.
And that's an interesting view, So, Herman, just before we move on, I want to get your thoughts on this. Do you think this is more of a transition issue that's happening within the DA, or is it some sort of weakness, Herman?
I think Sanusha says a lot of things that I absolutely agree with. And I think one thing is that the DA sort of grew itself into a type of political schizophrenia, where you had this mishmash of many political ideologies, where you had remnants of Afrikaner nationalism in the NNP, you had remnants of the PFP, the Progressive Federalist Party, you had Patricia de Lille's Independent Democrats. It was a very broad church, and structures with a base too broad can't support a lot of pressure from above. So I think the party, and that of course saw a lot of growth in a relatively short period for the party. If you look that they went from a 1-2% party in 1994 to the official opposition in 1999, to then to go from 1.4%, I think, in 94 to 9.2%, I think, in 99, then on to 16%, then 22, and then they reached their peak performance in the 2016 municipal elections, where if you take the proportionate ballot, they got about just under 25, 24-ish% of the vote. Now, that's quite solid and fast progress for a political party. And I think that growth was partly organic, because I think it was part of a maturing democracy, but I also think it was partly synthetic, in the sense that it incorporated incoherent bits that translated into political support, but not necessarily internal coherence. And I think one thing about politics is that the voter doesn't care too much about ideology and policy. It's important, but it's not as important as other matters of perception and competence and power and those kind of things. But what is important about ideology and policy and philosophy is, does it sustain an internal coherence within a political party? And I think this is why this weekend was such an important moment. It was the first time that I can at least remember where the DA had this specific discussion to define itself philosophically and ideologically, to decide, to have this discussion between various groups and decide what's this common ideological position holding this collection, this alliance together. So I think that is it strength or is it weakness? It might be a bit of both, but I think it is part of growing, and any political party needs to reach this point of what does it want to do with the power it is seeking from the electorate. I personally think that this weekend was a good weekend. Steps were taken in the right direction on non-racialism. I think is especially welcoming. To not deny racism, but to endorse the founding values in Section 1 of the Constitution, to say that South Africa is a non-racial multi-party democracy. But I think what is more interesting, perhaps, than that is this endorsement of the social market economy. Now, the social market economy is a very fascinating historical economic model that saw its real, manifestation in West Germany after the Second World War, where the so-called Wirtschaftswunder managed to get West Germany from a very, very damaged economic place to a place of strength within a decade. So that, I think, is a very interesting compromise position economically between what you might call the classical liberals, very strongly capitalist, the social democrats that see a greater role for the state in addressing inequality. And I think the social market economy, it seems to me to be a promising pragmatic step in bringing some ideological and economic policy coherence to something that is a bit of an unwieldy creature because of its history and rapid growth.
So the party's reputation was dealt a huge blow after a number of resignations from the party took place around October 2019. And Herman, I'm sure you would recall that interview that we actually had during when after Musi Mevani had resigned, after Herman Mashaba had resigned. So in Nkosi Kudede, it seems the exodus seems to be ongoing now with John Moody's resignation. So I think as the party tries to put itself to tries to figure out what exactly its purpose is in the South African electorate, what it has to offer the electorate, Mr. Nyembezi, I think it would be quite some time until the party manages to pull itself together.
Well, it depends on the angle to which you look at it. we understand that this is the year when the party is supposed to have its elective congress, get new leadership in place. And that event is overdue because we had COVID 19 and the lockdown. So the preparations were inhibited insofar as you would see from the provinces, the regions, in terms of the federal councils, actively preparing for that, the nominations and how they unfold. And of course, if things happened as normal, you would see some people being elbowed out of the leadership of the party, and it becomes nasty in one way or the other. So now we have seen, under this context of a delayed, deferred Congress that is being prepared under constraints of COVID 19 and lockdown, we have seen this kind of pressure being released in some unusual way, insofar as we have seen some leaders getting out. A political party is a living being, so you have to have new blood coming in and old blood coming out. And so you, if you look at it on a positive side, you could say one way or the other, some leaders had to go out. But the big thing that we need to be looking at is how centered is the party leadership in terms of trying to keep the membership together, to drive the party forward so that the party is responsive in terms of what are the current challenges facing the country. And also, if this was happening in a context of a Congress and new leadership being elected, we would then look to see how the leadership that's being elected is likely to take forward the programs of the party such that it can continue to grow. So I wouldn't take it as a train smash that you see some leaders exiting the stage.
Mm. So, Herman, coming back to you. So, members who resigned at the time last year in October, including former leader Mohsin Maimane, placed their concerns in the public domain. I mean, it was well known, that statement by Herman Bashaba as well, that the DA he signed up for, not necessarily the DA he left when he did leave the party. So, do you think the party has managed to address any of these issues that were raised at the time?
I Yes and no. Yes, in a sense that I think, if you look at where the party was about a year ago, it was in great turmoil. If you think this is uncertainty and instability, a year ago I think it was even greater. I think this past year, with all its faults and the uncertainties and the delayed Congress, as pointed out, I think it has been a more of a stabilization year for the DA than is perhaps generally acknowledged. To think that the last time there was a bit of a leadership exit and something that really caught the headlines, it was last year October, and now again with John Moody. To go a year without a big resignation of drama isn't necessarily the sign of a party in existential decline. It's definitely a party that is asking some inherent questions of itself, but I don't think it's a sign of a collapsing party. Now, when it comes to leadership, success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. And the problem with Mr. Maimane is that he really was the leader of the party that achieved its greatest success in the 2016 municipal elections, but also its most catastrophic weak performance in going backwards for the first time in the 2019 election. When that election result came in, it was clear that his position was at least questionable, not necessarily he was a done deal, but there were questions that needed to be asked. And that is why Mr. Maimane instituted the Kutsia report panel to look into the weaknesses. And it was a panel that Mr. Maimane appointed with Ryan Coetzee, long-term respected Democratic Alliance strategist, former close supporter and aide of Tony Leon, and people like Michiel Leroux, very much an influential donor and long history with the political party. And of course, Tony Leon was also involved in that. And Mr. Maimane appointed this panel. But I think the problem came in that Mr. Maimane was more of a consensus seeker than his predecessor, Helen Zille. When you have a fractious coalition or an alliance, I think a strong personality with a bit of iron, with a bit of fight, and not necessarily someone in love with the idea of consensus. I think leadership can compromise for structural weakness. And I think Mr. Maimane's leadership style was consensus seeking. And if you have a fractious party, consensus seeking is not, I think, the best way to go about it from a leadership point of view. So when Mr. Maimane left, and of course Mr. Mashaba also left, and now we have John Moody. And an interesting thing is that they all say that the DA is no longer the DA they joined. I think if you are the leader of a party and you are unable to lead the party to follow you, and you end up in a situation where you say you do not recognize the party, then I think, objectively speaking, you have failed in your leadership role. It is the role of a leader to point the troops in a direction and say march. And if Mr. Maimane could not achieve that, I think he was a weak leader. But I feel a lot of sympathy for him. It was Samadora Fikeni who worded this brilliantly. He said, the DA microwaved young black leaders into positions of influence within the party. And I think that is what happened with Mr. Maimane. He was very young, he was very inexperienced, he had a lot of potential and a lot of talent. But I think the party's push, and Helen Zille deserves some significant criticism for this, the party's push to get black leadership at all costs really cost them in actually nurturing sound leadership that could maintain a fractious party. So I don't think it is necessarily fair to say that the DA has endemic problems of racism. I think that it had more problems of coherence, internal coherence. And I, for one, am very, very skeptical when people start playing the race card. I always think it's the easiest card to play in politics. So when someone plays it, to me, it's an indication that let's look a bit deeper, because that's just too simple an explanation.
Yeah, and we'll speak about the outcomes of this policy conference, which took place over the weekend. But, speaking about leadership now, the party is also set to hold its leadership election in the next 2 weeks or so. What kind of outcome are you predicting, Sanusha?
Let me just backtrack a little bit to what Herman and my other colleagues said. I think it's very important, because I think, what we're seeing here is, I like the term. I think Somadari Fikeni hit the nail on the head with that microwave analogy. But it also makes me wonder, to what extent were they so rushed to find consensus African leadership that brought people like Mmusi Maimane into the party? Because I remember, sitting at the 2014 election in Pretoria at the Nerve Center and watching how the accolades and the praise for Mmusi Maimane was being laid out by the DA's press conference, which was led by Helen Zille, and the frigid relationship between her and Lindiwe Mazibuko. And here you had a black woman, strong, who was the chief whip in the party in parliament, basically had all of the right credentials, but you went for the male counterpart. You didn't really understand that here was a young African woman, and if you basically took this woman, and of course with all all her what's and all, and groomed her in a way that not necessarily to mold her into your own identity, but allow her to become that individual who she's flourished, would have been interesting for me, because then it makes me wonder, was there a particular type of Black leadership that the DA was looking for that was also about consensus building and microwavable around consensus, to take some Dada's analogy further, because it to me it says that maybe there was something in Lindiwe Mazibuko that was a bit too critical, and maybe she would have been her own person at some times. But you see, these are just optics, these are perceptions, and these are just the way people begin to speculate about the issues when you see these kinds of dynamics unfold within the party. And it comes down to the question you're asking, Zahid, about the next Congress and who's going to the leadership. And I don't think John I think John Steenhuisen is going to come out the winner. I think he's got enough gravitas in the party. He's got enough support in the party, and I think it's gonna play itself out in the way that, again, as much as we don't want the race card to be played, it's going to be played in the optics and the analysis and how it's going to come out. I think the bigger challenge for this Congress is not who wins the leadership of the DA, is how the person or the leadership of the DA implements what they decided this weekend at the Congress around this approach to the economy based on underpinning the sustainable development goals and what Herman spoke about as a social market economy. Now, I think that the idea of a social market economy is wonderful. Because it made perfect sense if you take the whole question of Keynes economics, and if you take the context of looking at what came out of what was the impact of the Second World War on Germany, but also reading the works of Karl Polanyi and the social transformation agenda and so forth. The one little tingling issue for me is that it worked in a particular time frame, in a particular historic period. And let's not forget, there was the cousins across the Atlantic who basically supported this through the Marshall Plan. So there was an aid that underpinned this. And then I look at the economic justice transformation document by the DA, it hits all the right notes about inequality. In fact, it even says that the neoliberal trickle-down effect never really worked. But at the end of the day, we are sitting in a different context and in a different set of structural conditions that are defining this world order that we are in. And in South Africa, I think that the question of a social market economy is something that you want to create in terms of how you redistribute, or you distribute in an equitable way the resources of the country. But you have to deal with the fact that there are corporates out there that still have a very old, and if not a very predatory view of capitalism and of the way profits are to be made. And this is where we are. We are in this tussle. And so if the existential crisis, when I agree, it's not necessarily the party is going to implode, it's going to vanish into thin air and everything's going to go poof, and that's going to be at midnight. No. But what is really the crisis here is that the existential crisis is the existential crisis of the models that we use and how those models then need to be adapted to the structural conditions. And one of my famous quotes, since we're quoting people, is Antonio Gramsci's quote, where I'll paraphrase it for you. He says, "The old is dying, the new is yet to be born, and in the interim, there's a morbidity of consequences." And so for me, this is where we are, not just in the context of what is the future of the DA. I think it's the same existential question, or partial existential question, for the ANC. I think the DA was lucky in a sense, or played its cards right, because why create a crisis when your ruling party is creating all the crisis? So it deflects away from you. Let's leave it at that. But I mean, the point being here is that it's about the fact that we cannot continue with not just what we've been doing in South Africa, but globally and regionally and continentally, these economy, the type of market approach that we are taking is something that we have to think very critically about. And I don't know, maybe Herman can expand on this, but I didn't see land. I may have missed it in the document, or maybe I was reading too fast, but I didn't see land as one of those drivers of inequality in South Africa, which is quite an integral part of identity in the context of the Freedom Charter, and of course in the context of the Constitution. And the second point to make about this is, how are we going to ensure that we use that we can transcend the race? Because again, intergenerational inequality also has a race dynamic to it.
Yeah, and just speaking about the leadership and Lindiwe Mazibuko, do you think it would have turned out a little differently had Lindiwe Mazibuko been chosen as a successor for Helen Zille instead of Mmusi Maimane?
I think hindsight is 2020, so let's leave it at that. I think some of us would like to think that it would have turned out better. Some of us we all are speculating right now, and we're saying that she was there, whatever. We don't know how she would have turned out. We don't know whether she would have become frustrated as well and said, heck, I've had enough. I'm throwing the towel in. I'm still going to the Kennedy School. I'm going to go and do my studies there. Or we don't know whether or not they could have found a space in where she and Mmusi Maimane could work together. But it does beg the question that if you wanted to grow this party amongst African electorate, because for me the definition of black includes colored and Indian, who in a way have a footprint in the party. If we look at the last election last year, I was just looking at the Indian votes in Durban, in KZN, and majority of working class Indians voted DA. Let's not shy away from that fact. In the Western Cape, the DA still enjoys the traction. Whether the John Moody issue is going to affect it, people raise questions about the Patricia de Lille leaving the party and how that may affect it. But it's still very much early days in terms of whether mindsets are changing. But in the context of building a footprint amongst young African voters is going to be critical. And I think if you are looking for that, why would you go for a consensus partner or a consensus candidate? You would want a candidate that will be strong, decisive, etc. What it makes me think is that as much as you wanted to transform the party, you didn't want to transform it that much further. So you still want to keep some level of reign and control. Now, these are my interpretations. I could completely wrong, but from somebody that sits on the outside looking in, I can understand how the optics come across. I can understand how people will feel. I mean, you have the same issues in terms of what's going on. Why are these leaders, these people of color that are leaving the party and making these statements? Now, we don't know. It's a lot of he said, she said, they said kind of arguments that are taking place. But I think at the end of the day, if you want to build a party to a point of non-racialism, the other elements and structural issues need to come in, and that is the question of trust. You talked about the leadership Congress and who's going to come out, and I said John Steenhuisen will come out, and he'll definitely be the next leader of the party. He's worked really hard for it, and he's been the party chief whip and so forth. But I think that's going to be the success. But the bigger challenge for him is growing, or not even growing the party, implementing the policies, keeping to the line of non-racialism, sticking to the lane of what you pick as your ideological space, and whether or not that's going to get blurred. Now, the question is, the youth factor is going to be critical. And I was listening to Gwen Ngwenya about the policy issues and so forth. And I was listening, and I read Bali Ntuli's piece in the Business Day about a stakeholder economy. I think it's all fascinating. It's all important because these economies can't exist if you don't have these different stakeholders in there. But it'll be interesting to see in terms of a social market economy where labor fits in there.
All right, that's really interesting the way you put it for us. But at 33 minutes past 7 p.m. Central African time, I think we have got to take an ad break. And when we get back, I also want to hear from some of the listeners what they have to say about this discussion, what we are discussing, of course, the DA internal politics at the party. But all of that after the ad break. So let's take an ad break, and when we get back, we will dig deeper. Please do stay tuned.
Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa. With over 80 years of experience, IG Hussein and Company are renowned for their quality Islamic wear and goods. IG Hussein and Company stock a variety of Islamic items, musallas, kitabs, Medina dates, perfumes and exclusive gifts. We guarantee you a unique and friendly shopping experience for the entire family. Visit our new branch in Overport at 202 Kenilworth Park, Brickfield Road. Open 7 days a week with ample parking and wheelchair friendly. Like us on Facebook or Instagram at IG Hussein for our latest promotions and updates. IG Hussein and Company, your Islamic lifestyle.
Dad, well, I've been chatting with an investment broker today and...
Broker? Did the broker tell you that our economy is a mess? There's bushfires in Australia, America wanted World War III, and now the coronavirus is traveling around the world.
Well, I also thought about purchasing some crypto.
Crypto? What's that, like another pyramid scheme? I don't trust what I can't see.
There's an apartment in Belito.
So only your family will be asking to stay there for free. And what if the government takes it away, eh?
Dad, I don't think it works like that.
I'll tell you what works. Gold. At your age, I invested in gold coins and it paid for your university fees and your wedding. No contracts, no agreements. Your investment is in your hands and you own it. With a 70% growth in only 5 years, do you still doubt gold investment? Contact RJ Coin today, 031 202 4701, or visit them at 151 Stephen Lamini Road in Musgrave, Durban. Randery Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange, your passport to gold investment.
Would you like to give Sadaqah 365 days a year? You can with the Al Imdad Foundation's Daily Sadaqah program. Donate as little as R1 a day for a month for each member of your family, up to any specified amount, and receive monthly feedback on where your contributions have made a difference. Visit alimdad.com and download your Daily Sadaqah debit order form or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness, and every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and freezer card calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
Welcome back. You are tuned into Salam Media. This is the special focus. My name is Zahid Jadwat, and this evening we are speaking about the issues at the Democratic Alliance, of course, the official opposition of South Africa, and we are speaking about what exactly is going on in this party, of course, ahead of the 2021 local government elections, and this seems to have been started from at least a year before, in October 2019. So we are speaking about the DA tonight, and my guests, let me just remind you, firstly we have Sinusha Naidu, who is a senior research associate at the Institute for Global Dialogue. We also have Nkosi Kulule Nyambezi, who is a policy analyst and chairperson of Election Monitoring Network, and Herman Pretorius, who is a political analyst at the IRR, that's the Institute for Race Relations. Now, thank you so much for tuning in, and thanks to the guests also for staying with us this evening. Mr. Nkosi Kulule, if we could just come to you now, speaking about the leadership, continuing this discussion where we left off before the ad break, we were speaking about the leadership. Of course, the DA is set to have its leadership election in the next 2 weeks or so. Sinusha believing that John Steenhuisen will emerge victorious in this leadership election. Just your thoughts on that, Mr. Nyambezi?
Yes, I think that the leadership issue is an interesting one in the DA, particularly to see if it will be able, in the end, to attract new voters, to attract new members, because we are now entering an era where the born freeze, children born after 1994, are beginning to take leadership positions. And the second wave of that is those born after the year 2000, AMA 2000. They are comprising a significant segment of the voters' roll. So by the time we go to elections, we have to see if the political party, the ramblings and the squabbles and the chattering you are hearing, if it speaks to that segment of the voter. So the issue here is that some of the issues that seem to be on the foreground, be it ideology, be it the positioning of the party, may actually not necessarily hook up and resonate with the constituency that they need to be appealing to if they want to retain their position as the opposition, official opposition, if they want to retain their position as the leader in many of the municipalities that they were able to garner support in. So the issue of the changing profile of the voter is an important one that we still need to see if the DA's thing is in sync with.
Yeah, and of course, importantly, next year being the local government elections. So, Herman, do you think the party will be able to recognize itself and pull itself together to contest the election and appeal to the electorate? And if it fails to do so, what does it stand to face in 2021?
You know, interestingly, if you had asked me this in January, I would have given you a completely different answer. I would have said, I think 2021 is going to be a very painful year for the DA, not enough time for new leadership to find its feet, to assert dominance in the party. And then came COVID-19. And I think that COVID-19, the crisis and the fallout from that, has given the DA a sense of momentum and direction that I think it might have been lacking heading into 2021 had this year not been the mad year that it has been. And I think it has also been good for John Steenhuisen's shot at the leadership, because during a time of national crisis, what more do you want than to be the acting leader running for the permanent leader spot? You have the bully pulpit, you speak about policy, you take on the president, you have the best airtime in the country. Meanwhile, your opponent is a very bright young girl who is, well, compared to you at least, very young. I think she's older than I am, so perhaps I should say a young black woman who is very able, but who's stuck in KwaZulu Natal, who can't get the national spotlight on her as easily as you can. So looking ahead at next year, a few things should be very much in front of mind for the Democratic Alliance. The ANC's electoral support, if you track electoral performance with living circumstances, access to water, access to electricity, number of houses built, GDP growth, employment, there's a very neat correlation that you see. Because in 2004, of course, the ANC gets 70% of the vote. Now, that's 10 years after the great 1994 change, and they still managed to go to 70% of the vote, up from the 63 that they got in 94. Why? GDP growth of above 3-4%, meaning hundreds of thousands of jobs created per year. Look at that same period. More for every shack built, 10 permanent houses built. Water, access to water goes up, access to electricity goes up. When the people of this country see their material circumstances improve, the ANC do well. Then you start looking at the decline, and when you start seeing the dramatic fall after 2014, it's not just the electoral confidence that is shaken, it is material living circumstances for the most vulnerable South Africans. So the material circumstances of South Africans have been clapped a lot by this COVID-19 situation, and the ANC, I think, is panicking. What else but panic could drive the ANC, the party of the arms deal and the Zondo Commission and Kandla, to suddenly talk tough on corruption? What else could drive the ANC to suddenly say, oh, farm murders, important thing, let's discuss that in the National Assembly. I think it's a party knowing that because the material circumstances of South Africans have been so negatively affected, they know their electoral lot is closely tied in there. So from about 2012 onwards, the IRR has been saying that in 2024, we think the ANC will dip below 50%. And the economist Russell Lamberti pointed out, I think very astutely, that COVID-19 was a trend accelerator. I think it might have brought that 2024 date up a bit. Not quite sure it's 2021 yet, but we must understand that lockdown has been economically damaging. Economic damage translates to electoral damage for the ANC. So the ANC is in a vulnerable position. The DA has had a relatively good lockdown. I think as an opposition party, they've been supportive enough when they needed to be, but they've also put out alternative proposals, which with varying merits of success and sensibility, but they were at least an active opposition party. And they of course managed the Western Cape, which at the very beginning of the lockdown seemed to be in a very bad state, but that they actually seemed to manage. And I remember a very, very powerful Business Day headline, Western Cape peaks with hospital room to spare. So long and short, what does this mean for 2021? A weak ANC, a nervous ANC, a panicked EFF, and I think the clicks thing shows that they don't know in which direction to go, and perhaps the DA might just start feeling a bit bolder than they would have felt a year ago or even 6 months ago heading into 2021.
Of course, and we will get into this discussion about the three major parties. Of course, as you mentioned, the ANC in its own position here, the EFF also a bit panicked, as you say, and of course now the DA in its own with its own internal politics as well. So I think this will be interesting to see how this plays out in the next election, and I think we'll get into that discussion a little later. But Sanusha, a strong opposition party does play a major role in democracy. So how do you think the internal politics at the Democratic Alliance have affected the democracy of South Africa, if it has at all?
Zahid, I think that one is really should be at the doorstep of the ANC. It's the ANC's internal domestic issues that have become a real blight on the South African body politic and on the landscape. I mean, yes, the DA's internal politics, yes, it spills over. There are questions about whether the party is growing in the way that it should. Is there a politically correct approach to the way the party should be growing? Are there questions around identity, ideological dispensations, people being frustrated, throwing their toys out of the cot, making accusations, dealing with all of that? That hasn't really affected me in the manner in which, when I look at the Zondo Commission, I get really upset. Or if I'm going to watch the fact that the COVID-19 PPE tenders were squandered, I get really upset because to my mind, that is where the real challenge is for the governance of our state. The body politic of our state lies in the fact that we need to have some level of accountability, transparency, but more importantly, some level of moral, ethical governance. People who will feel that what they are doing is wrong. And then when you listen to these individuals and you listen to the Zondo Commission and you listen to the evidence coming out from other commissions as well, you as a voter, at this point in time, I'm not a political analyst. I'm an ordinary person, a voter, and I ask myself every single day, do I want to vote? Who I'm going to vote for? What would this vote do for me? And this is me. My mom has the same dilemma. Other people that I speak to in my family say, why must I vote? They stole my money. So I think the opposition, the role of the opposition party is to also be able to hold the ruling party or the ruling government in power accountable. It's like, somebody said to me, the role of civil society is to say, ask the awkward questions, shine the light in the dark spaces. And the problem we have here is that I don't think I mean, as much as we're talking about the DA and we're talking about where the DA is going and will 2021 or 2024 be a turning point for the DA and how it will develop coherence, but also coalesce in its identity and become comfortable with what its entity is. I think the bigger challenge is what do we see in going forward for the ANC? And it brings me to the point about 2021. I think one of the challenges that the DA faces is in 2016, they chose coalition partners that didn't really have a right mix to them. They didn't have the right feel. And if it was done through consensus, then I think they need to be more circumspect and more coherent about who they want to go into to run a municipality or to run a metro, who are going to be their partners, because we saw the debacles in the Nelson Mandela Bay, we see in the debacles in Shwane, and of course, if you go into the Kuru, you've got a few other of those debacles unfolding there, where the ANC has now joined a community-based party, and are they going to contest the 2021 election? The problem here is it's not about just whether you grow at the polls. Is the fact of the matter is when you actually win votes, it's what you do with that win that's more important. It's not about saying, I need to take control, I must be in control, I'm going to bring this coalition partner and that coalition partner. Because the problem with coalition partners is that sometimes the partners that you're going to engage in are really just one man, one big man. So the big man syndrome becomes the coalition partner. There's nobody else in that partner. And so for me, I think the challenge in all of this is that if you are going to get that kind of that clarity, as Herman was putting it across, about the DA and where it's going, then that clarity has to also recognize that when you come to 2021, and if you see there's a hung municipality in Durban, or a hung municipality in Ekurhuleni, or a hung municipality in Shwane, or heaven forbid, a hung municipality in the city of Cape Town, who are you going to choose? Because you're then going to end up coming back to the first point that we were making, and that is you're going to end up with a mishmash of haphazard people who you have no loyalty to, who may not share your vision and your ideology and your philosophy of a social market economy, who may not share the idea that we need to make the street lights work, because they have a completely different interpretation of what it means to be in a coalition. And I think that for me would be the one issue that the DA going forward needs to be very careful of, and needs to be much more clearer about, in terms of what they are going to do if they have to go into coalitions, because their coalition experience thus far has not been a very nice one, especially in the Eastern Cape and of course elsewhere. And the third point about it is, if you're going into a coalition, apart from choosing who the coalition is, you've got to also do a little bit of your own background vetting and know that the people that are going to play particular roles in the coalition are going to serve it out to its fullest capacity. And we know the debacle in Shwane and how that played itself out. So for me, the challenge is that there's an opportunity here for the DA, but an opportunity that can actually get easily lost, because you may be so caught up in the structural dynamics of saying, I want to lead that province, I want to lead that municipality. You get so caught up in the giddy power of acquisition that you don't realize that getting power, acquiring power is one thing. What you do with that power is another. And so you can end up having really bad people and bad managers in your municipality who are ineffective, who do not actually perform their jobs. And then at the end of the day, DA goes back to square one.
Yeah, and importantly, as you mentioned about the role that the opposition has, especially now during the pandemic, of holding the ANC, the ruling party, accountable for the alleged allegations of corruption, etc. But now, of course, as Herman also making that point about the DA having been able to build on the weaknesses of the ANC. So, Mr. Nyambezi, if we could just, as brief as possible, as time seems to be against us this evening, how do you think these internal politics will affect the Democratic Alliance come 2021?
It will have to work hard to keep the gains that it made. It will have to work hard to keep stability and the center holding, because to some people, political parties have shown to be a liability, that you can't trust them anymore to say, we entrust your vote to you, you will do as you promise. But they seem to be this stumbling block to progress, as many examples have shown, in terms of how the DA has not been able to pull through in the different metros that it has able to get the majority of votes. And so it will have to work very hard. Also, because now the space is opening up for independent candidates to contest elections, even at provincial and national level. So municipalities are seen as a low rung to climb up the ladder if you want to show yourself true that you can be able to get to the provincial and national stage. So we might see a significant number of people who used to wear those blue t-shirts contesting the elections, the next municipal elections, as independent candidates, and claiming or that victory that the DA used to claim as a collective, but they could be attributing it to themselves, and they might as well go on to win the seats in different wards, and by that way dissipate the support that the DA has held for up to this far.
Yeah, and that just reminds me about Herman Mashaba's formation of his own political party. And I think it would be interesting to see how these ex-members of the DA, how their other plans since leaving the DA, how they will impact the DA's electoral base in 2021 and in the next election to come. But unfortunately, we have to begin wrapping up. So much more to speak about this evening. So I think let's begin wrapping up. Each one of you, your final thoughts. We begin with Herman and then Sanusha and finally Mr. Nyambezi.
Well, Zahid, firstly, I just want to say thank you for one of the most fascinating discussions I've been privileged to take part in. It's been really just great chatting to my colleagues and to you. Thank you for fascinating. I loved it. Thank you. I wish we could go on for another hour. I think so many good points have been raised here, but I think possibly my favorite one was when Sanusha said this or brought in this notion of, can the DA learn from its mistakes of unstable coalitions? Because I think they went into the 2016 coalitions assuming that the Cape Town coalition of 2000 and the mid-2000s, 2006, I think, a 7-party coalition, I think they kind of assumed that all coalitions would last the full term as the previous one, not looking at why that first coalition was successful, and understanding that that coalition was center-right, consistently over the political spectrum. It didn't jump across the political spectrum as you have IFP, COPE, Freedom Front Plus, EFF. But this time we did saw that jump. And what I think is very fascinating is Leon Schreiber. Dr. Leon Schreiber is now a DA MP, and he did a doctorate, and it was published as a book, Coalition Country, which I could encourage anyone to read. It is about coalition forming in South Africa. Fascinating book. And it's, to me, interesting that they've added him to their arsenal, perhaps with an eye to negotiating some of the coalition stuff going forward.
Yeah, thank you so much for your contribution. Of course, it has been a privilege to host each one of you on the show, and to be the host of the show that many listeners, I'm sure, have enjoyed. Thanks to your contribution. But let's now wrap up, because it is, of course, just 2 minutes left. So, Sanusha, your final thoughts?
No, I think what my colleague said, and to echo what Herman is saying, I think this is a fantastic panel, and I think the way we bounced off each other with our ideas was just so fantastic. But I think that the challenge is really for the Congress. What happens at the Congress? How does the Congress go forward? Does it implement, and how does it implement? And whether or not it's able to attract new voters. And of course, there are a lot of young voters there and other voters who have become disaffected. And then, of course, you've got to remember that there's a group in society, a class in society called the precariat, who hold no loyalty to anyone. And the precariat is essentially people that have been disaffected, haven't been part of the mainstream. And how do you get them? How do you appeal to that group? So it's not just the youth. And then finally, I think when you think about coalitions, I think the other challenge is the personalities that drive coalitions, because that is the serious dilemma that the ANC, the DA, and other political parties will have in going forward. And whether or not you are willing to go into a coalition with a partner which you cannot stand, but nevertheless, the greater goal is I want to rule, but rule for what purpose?
Thank you so much for that. Nkosi Kulule, your final thoughts?
Well, Peter Dick said the past is certain. It is the he said the future is certain. It's the past that we are unsure of. So, in the light of these new 2000s, the bond freeze, I think that there's a lot that of readjusting and adjusting that we'll have to customize with, and it's a long way to the elections of 2021, but it's not going to be as usual for the DA and for many other parties. So we will be looking with interest to see how the political parties hold on to that space and do what they claim to be.
Of course, it will be really interesting, to see how this unfolds. And of course, time will tell, I guess. But so many unanswered questions which I had prepared, so many interesting points made by you as the panelists, which I would have loved to pick up on. But unfortunately, time, the usual enemy here on the show. But thank you so much for your time, Sanusha Naidu, Senior Research Associate at the Institute for Global Dialogue, Nkosi Kulule Nyembezi, Policy Analyst and Chairperson of the Election Monitoring Network, Herman Pretorius, Political Analyst at the Institute of Race Relations, and he is the Deputy Head of Policy Research at the Institute of Race Relations. Thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you to the listeners for tuning in. Of course, we cannot do the show without you tuning in, and your feedback, of course, most welcome. You can send that to info@salammedia.com. To the technical team as well, thank you so much for your efforts to make the show what it is from behind the scenes. But from myself, Zahid Jadwat, and the team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Lovely.